Welcome, welcome. Good evening. Welcome, everybody.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody who's joining us tonight on this Faces of Orthodoxy Instagram Live. The topic is being a religious teenager in 2022. I got a lot of jokes about that, and none of us are teenagers. That is correct. But I'm thrilled to have my two guests here tonight who really are in the trenches, either dealing with teens themselves or mentoring and counseling parents of teens. And I think they both have a pretty good handle on what it's like and what the experiences are like of Orthodox teens. Obviously, generalizations and also based on, specifics in terms of the experiences that they both have. So let's do some introductions. Rina Duetsch, if you could just please tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and what your experience is working with teenagers.
Okay, so my name is Rina Duetsch, and a little bit about, let's say, my background. I feel like I have a lot of personal experience in this area because I know for myself, growing up as a teenager in a frum community, I went to a school that was like, mostly center, but a little bit to the right of center, and that kind of thing. So, I feel like I bring a lot of my experience personally growing up into this. As far as my experience dealing with teenagers today goes, I have been living with a minimum of 3 teenagers in my house for the last 6 years.
You're qualified to be here, Rina.
And thank God I am very blessed to be a Judaic studies teacher at a B'nai Akiva schools, girls high school here in Toronto.
Could you explain a little bit about, what B'nai Akiva means in terms of like the religious spectrum?
Sure. So I don't love putting these sorts of things into boxes. I think, we're all Jewish, but B'nai Akiva is definitely, it's modern, I would say it's a more modern Orthodox Zionist in its perspective on things. And I guess that's the way I would describe it.
Okay, great. And I think sometimes for people who are not really, exposed to the Orthodox community in depth, there are often these, misnomers that like we're all Hasidic, I
Right.
say with the H, Hasidic. And there's so many variations and flavors and stripes and philosophies like within Orthodoxy. And you're coming from more of the modern Orthodox educational system.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Got it. And your average teaching day, what grades are you teaching? What ages are you dealing with?
So I teach 9 through 12. I'm dealing with anywhere between 14 and 18 years old.
Wow. Okay, great. All right, Rabbi Horowitz, welcome. Please let us know a little bit about yourself, please.
I'm Yakov Horowitz. Well, my claim to fame in this subject is that we have 4 teenage grandkids already.
Wow.
So I guess I dated myself. That's fine.
Yeah.
I started teaching 41 years ago. I started within 15 years. I was a Judaic studies teacher, first in Brooklyn and later on in Monsey. I volunteered to take the track of students who hadn't yet been successful in Gemara. So I walked into class every morning with a greeting 20, 25 adolescents who absolutely did not want to be there.
Wow.
Have had it with Gemara and I absolutely loved every moment of it. I did that for 15 years. Then I started my own school and ran that for 22 years. But in 1996, actually, I wrote an article, An Ounce of Prevention, it was called. It was basically saying that we're losing a percentage of our children to religion. It doesn't have to be this way. Here are some ideas. And I did not know the power of the written word until then, because our phone lines exploded. We got at least 300-400 calls a month for months. We got member letters. We got at least 100 of those. I mean, for sure in the first month. It was just totally inundated. Some people praising what I wrote, some people criticizing what I wrote. But they were mostly parents who were just begging for help. So together with Agudath Israel, I started an organization called Project Yes. We had mentoring programs. We did a teen mentoring program. We did a lot of parent education. We had a big brother, big sister program that we ran for many years. And more recently, I started about 10 years ago, I got much more involved in child abuse prevention because a lot of the teens that we were working with that were really, unfortunately, in poor shape, we found a very large percentage of them had been abused as children. Mm-hmm. So I started writing and begging people to listen, and together with Artscroll, we published a book called Let's Stay Safe. Thank God it's in 3 languages. We're in over 130 homes already. 130,000 homes, excuse me, in Israel.
I interviewed Bracha Getz, the illustrator, on my podcast,
she wrote the book,
These Meaningful Conversations, and she picked up the book and she told us the whole story behind it.
Yeah.
Really ahead of its time a little bit, no? In terms of the timing of the book?
Oh, yeah, sure. It was 10 and a half years ago we published the book. It was something really radical at the time. I give Artscroll. Artscroll is a very large Hebrew publishing company, and the founder of it, Zlotowitz, was very brave to do it. It was a really gutsy move on his part, for which I'm forever grateful to him for. So we've been doing a lot of child advocacy for abuse victims. I primarily focus on preventing abuse in the first place because I'm an educator at heart. Everything is about education. So. I've been supporting some survivors through trials and other things with very high-profile abusers. But mostly now I do parent mentoring. We just started on Instagram. We started June 1st. I started under a minute parenting clips. This was a very big paradigm shift for a 62-year-old rabbi.
Under
1 minute is so hard, right, Rina? Rina does Parsha in a minute.
Very well. I haven't been in under a minute in a while, but yeah.
Yeah, not easy.
I actually studied the research. I did a great deal of research, and I just realized that if I want to stay in the game and I want to remain a parent mentor, being able to help the next generation raise their children, I did my first parenting. They were actually cassette tapes, if you really date myself, in the late 90s. And, an hour class was normal at the time, but that's not happening. So I had to really retool and be brave enough to change and get on Instagram and start packaging things and a minute is a lot. I've been doing 20-second clips now also. It is what it is. You can cluck your tongue and complain about it and whatever. It is what it is. That's the way it's got to go.
So you're utilizing social media to educate parents, essentially?
Yeah. That's yep.
And do you have a lot of parents reaching out to you, like in crisis, or if their teens are in crisis?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yes. The answer is yes.
I'm curious, do you have a system of counseling? Like I'd imagine you're just not giving up your time to speak to a parent for 45 minutes. How do you mentor them?
So right. Primarily, thankfully, when we started, there was just Ohel Children's Home, and that was it. So we did a lot more. My organization did a lot more client, working directly. We had therapists on staff and to help the families like that. But now that I'm with them, there are many wonderful agencies that do that. So I don't meet directly with adolescents or parents. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, some of the areas of Jewish life don't have that level of resources, like parents of LGBTQ kids or other things like that either don't feel comfortable talking, or so that's that in triaging my time and apportioning my time, I try to apportion my time to the folks who have the least level of services to work with.
Amazing. Okay, well, if we're having this conversation tonight about, the challenges facing Orthodox teens and what it's like being an Orthodox teen, I mean, we can't have this conversation without touching on the prevalence of what we call the OTD, the Afederach reality, where, many teens do not stay on the path, as expected or as their parents wish they would in terms of religious observance. And we're going to touch on that for sure. The reason we're having this conversation is on Faces of Orthodoxy, we try to, address certain issues that come up in the profiles that we're featuring weekly, and do a little bit more of an exploration of the topics in a Thursday Night Live. We're not going to be doing this every Thursday night. We've been doing a bunch of them since we launched the account about 6 weeks ago. But last week we featured Dina, and hopefully those of you who are listening had a chance to read her story. She's in 3 parts, as all of our stories are. She's a 10th grade teen in a modern Orthodox community, similar, Rina, to where you're coming from. And, listen, all of our people who are on the account right now in these beginning stages are such guinea pigs. I was so impressed that they all agreed to be like part of this project, and I'm interviewing them. I didn't know them before. They're sharing their life stories. They're giving me their personal photos. We're sending a photographer to do a photo shoot. So whatever I can get out of them, I am just so grateful. And Dina is this 16-year-old, and her parents were like, sure, she'll come on. Yes, you can take whatever family photo you want. Like, they were so accommodating. And Dina was a superstar. She, Baruch Hashem, thank God, got a lot of positive feedback and a lot of support on the account. And,
Nice.
it was very, very special. So we love her. We're a big Dina fan. And I want to just quote to you something that she said in the interview, and it's on, on the page, on the post. And she said, so about being a religious teenager, it isn't as different as people think it is. I don't feel like restrictions define my life. I thought that was a very fascinating perspective on restrictions. She said, we're chilled as a family about a lot of things, but Judaism isn't one of them. It sounds like in her family, and I know her parents, they're a very fun-loving family. They have a lot of fun when it comes to Jewish holidays. You could just see they're laid back. The father's a musician. They just seem like but somehow they've created this atmosphere in the home where they're fun-loving and chilled, but they're serious about their Judaism. And that doesn't seem to be a problem for her. And it sounds like she, accepts, when we talk about restrictions in Judaism and Orthodoxy, this is, Jewish law. We can't just do everything we want all the time. In terms of Jewish law does guide and, yes, quote unquote, restrict our behavior to a certain extent. And to her, she acknowledges the restrictions, but she doesn't feel, and she uses this language, that it defines her life. So I thought this was a fascinating perspective. And I'm really curious, from both of your perspectives, and Rina, we'll start with you, if you can describe what you're seeing in terms of, how teenagers today, and again, this is just based on your personal experience here, understand the restrictions that are so part and parcel of the Orthodox experience. Do you have students that, are like Dina here, who don't feel like they define her life and accept it? It depends on the age of the teenager? How are they relating to this concept of halacha, Jewish law, that, defines our life to a certain extent?
It's a great question. So the truth is I see the entire spectrum of this. We definitely I have lots of students who are like super happy to go along with things. And, there are certain things, and I love it when they're able to be honest with me about this. There are still, even within the fact that they love being a Frum Jew and they don't want anything to be different, they still every now and then will voice frustrations with certain things, or like, oh, this is a little complicated and difficult. And I think that that's really important for them to be able to voice that, to say, I do this, but sometimes it's difficult for me, or sometimes I find it frustrating or even restrictive. I think the idea that they could voice that is really super important. Yeah. And if I could be honest, I find that the girls who come from both the educational and family backgrounds where that is allowed tend to be the ones who are struggling less. Not always, of course, like, we're speaking in generalizations here, but it's a trend that I've sort of noticed.
Why do you think that is, if you don't mind me asking? It's like less of a taboo?
I think there's less of a taboo, and I think, and this is just my perspective, I think that when we try really hard to force things too much, or to narrow, I'm trying to think of the right analogy here. I'm trying to think of electricity, but I don't know enough about it. I just know that, when you push a current through, you have to push it through something really, really small to make it really hot and work. And okay, physics was never my thing.
You're not the science teacher. It's fine.
Not at all. But for some reason, electricity is coming to mind, like that idea of pushing something through something very small and it makes it very hot and that kind of thing. I think that when kids feel a lot of pressure, and especially there's for some reason or another, there's become this idea, this obsession with perfection. Mm-hmm. And when kids feel this pressure to be perfect, which literally no one can live up to, it confines them so much that, and again, like even without knowing why or for what, they want to just push against it. It's very, very difficult. So I feel like the places where the girls have a way to like let off some of the steam, it is a little bit easier for them to roll with things. And when they feel that they can express themselves, when they can feel that they can ask questions, where they feel that they can say like, oh, this is difficult, or maybe there's something I'm not understanding, or that kind of thing where it's accepted, they just, they get answers and they can feel a little bit more themselves. And when you can feel a little bit more yourself, you feel less confined. If you can actually say, I do this, but I have a hard time with it, you can maybe better come to terms with the fact that you're doing it, or you can continue with it. Whereas if you are having a hard time and you're literally not allowed to talk about it, again, it's just that pressure cooker. It makes it so much harder. And at a certain stage in the game, they explode. Mm-hmm. So I definitely have seen that. And I've seen girls also. There are girls who, like I said, they're generally speaking, they're doing really well. There are certain things that they have problems with, but overall they're good. Then there are girls who are in a little bit more of a struggling place where overall, they're trying to keep up with things, but it is much harder for them overall. They're struggling with a lot more. And then there are girls who are literally railing against it. And yeah, so I definitely see across the board, everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Rabbi Horowitz?
What do we know about the last 17 years of Yaakov Avinu's life, our patriarch Jacob? We know he arrived in Egypt, and it says he was there for 17 years, and those were probably the nicest, easiest years of his life. He had he had all kinds of obstacles in his way. We virtually know nothing about it. It's just he gives blessings to his children, to his Menashe, to his 2 grandchildren. That's all we know, right? So I used to tell my students that, why is that the case? Because the Torah is not telling us stories. The Torah is telling us the real life challenges and struggles that we overcame. That's why the Torah didn't cover up, it didn't project our greatest people as being perfect, because that's life is about dealing with struggles and dealing with challenges, whether it's our own, trying to refine our own midos, our temperament, our interaction with social interaction with our peers, with our friends, with our family. So I think what you said, Rina, is absolutely correct. I think we should embrace imperfection, because that's what makes us grow. That's what we. It's something I always stress to my students, and I always encourage them to ask any question, whatever's on their minds. There's no bad question. All questions are valid and good, and we talk about things. So I think that's part of this journey of helping our children get through adolescence and to become adults is to help them get comfortable with the notion that nobody's perfect, that we're all a work in progress. Mm-hmm. I hired Rabbi Dr. Chaim Foyman, Zechron Livracha, of blessed memory. He ran Azrieli's Teacher College. Did you know him? Oh,
I'm a graduate.
Okay, so he was my chinuch Rebbe. He was my mentor, and so I hired him to do a 5-year staff development program with our Judaic studies teachers, 8 sessions a year. It was very intensive. And I asked them beforehand, I said, Rabbi Foyman, I studied the research on how effective, what percentage of teachers change their practice in the classroom. And the numbers are not that great. You can look it up. To really change their practice, I said, what can I do to increase that? So he said, and when you were speaking to me, that's what I was thinking of. He said, first of all said, you should stay in for every single class, which of course I did. But then he said, when I finish that first session, tell the staff, say something like, we're learning new things. We're going to make mistakes. Let's embrace our mistakes. I'm not going to be good at supervising these new things we're going to be learning. I'm going to make mistakes. And if I come by your classroom and I see you're not making mistakes, that means you're not learning anything.
Wow.
And you just get everybody, you should know I was kind of on the fence about whether I was going to say it. It was a total game changer. I think it's a great message to parents that are raising your adolescent children. Just get them comfortable with the fact that this is a process, and we should be comfortable growing and learning from our mistakes.
It's such a different feeling. You can imagine like a teenage girl growing up at a home where mistakes are embraced as, like you said, is just a sign that you're learning, and it's a safe place where if you're asking questions, that means you're engaging in your Judaism, which is what Judaism is all about, asking those questions. I mean, what a different attitude versus if you're struggling about why you have to dress a certain way or only eat certain foods and struggling about the restrictions, but have no one to turn to. That can really build a lot of resentment, I think. So maybe that's one of the important takeaways here is just having home and teachers be a safe place to answer questions and voice frustrations.
Yeah, and if I may, so often the kids who ask questions, and they're often these really deep questions, and they're challenging questions, they so quickly get labeled as, oh, that's the bad kid. That's the problematic kid. Oh, you don't want that kid in your class. If I can be so bold as to say, I think sometimes it's because the teachers or parents don't have the answers. And we're afraid to say, wow, that's a great question. I don't know. Let's look it up together. My students are so used to me saying, wow, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. And I have had girls who have come into high school, and they say to me, are you allowed to say that? But what do you mean, am I allowed to say that? They said, I've never been told by a teacher in my life, I don't know the answer. I've always been told, don't ask that question, or that's not your business, like things like that. I'm like, well, you're a really smart kid. That's a great question. Maybe I'm not as smart as you. I don't know the answer. We'll find it together. And for them, first off, to be able to see that a teacher is willing to say, to be humble themselves and be like, I don't know everything, right? And to say to them, wow, that's a great question, not you're a troubled kid. Right? Like, we don't ask those kinds of questions. That is so not the Jewish way. Look at the Gemara. All it is rabbis arguing back and forth and asking questions and looking. And it's the greatest thing in the world. It's amazing. And that's how we learn, exactly like what Rabbi Horowitz was saying. So if we stigmatize the idea of asking questions, and if we make it that being imperfect is absolutely unacceptable, then again, we end up either creating automatons who are just shells of people going through the motions, which isn't ideally what we want anyways, or we end up sometimes sending people careening off the path because they just can't handle that restriction and that limitation and that inability to be open.
Right.
So
let me ask both of you just like a common scenario, like a kid who's like, listen, they're not like trying to be rebellious, but they're finding a certain restriction, let's say Shabbat, and they want to use their phone, because teenagers today live on their phones, and they are just finding that restriction of not being able to use your phone on Shabbos too restrictive. Or a girl who's like, the laws of modesty are just too much. And, I think that's a very common scenario where, again, it's not coming necessarily from a rebellious place. It's just wherever they're, whatever they're feeling in that moment, it is restrictive, and they're really feeling the restraints of it and controlling and limiting their behavior. What's the perspective on that?
Go ahead, Rabbi Horowitz.
And we're not, by the way, just to clear, Rabbi Horowitz is a rabbi. We're not speaking about the halachic permissibility, according to Jewish law, if it's okay to yes or not, whatever, guiding a child or guiding a parent how to handle these situations. But theoretically.
Right, but halacha Jewish law is immutable, but the fact of the matter is that especially adolescents, but not everybody is ready to take the whole package, and I think, what I advise parents, if the children say declaratively, if they're just grumbling about it, then they're in the game. Then you talk to them, you discuss it with them, and you it's just something. It's healthy for them to express it to you. I think it's a compliment to the parents that the children are comfortable enough saying to this. When I first started projects, one of the first calls that I got from a parent was a very Haredi, very observant fellow in Brooklyn. And he had a 17-year-old son, a superstar student in school, top Talmud learner, a great kid, wonderful, wonderful qualities, everything. And he came home and he told his father, he says, listen, I like Judaism. I'm not going anywhere, but I don't believe anything they're teaching me in school.
Wow.
This is what he told, I'm sorry?
Oh, wow.
That's what he told his father. He told his father, he said, I'm not going anywhere. Don't worry about it. Don't get nervous. But he said, I just, I don't believe that the splitting of the sea really happened, or the flood, the Mabul, And the father called me, says, Rabbi Horowitz, like, what do I do? What should I respond? So I said, I'll ask Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky Shlita, has been our rabbinic advisor for 25 years, more than 25 years. So I said, I think I'm going to check this one out. I said, I have a few things that I would say, but I'd like to discuss it with Rabbi Kamenetsky. And, but I told him before I hang up, you're an amazing father because he told you. That's what I told him. I said, pat yourself. I'm sorry, Rina, what'd you say?
It's so true. It's so true that a kid could feel comfortable enough to come to the parent and see something that they know is theoretically going to upset them. Think about what an amazing thing that is.
I do an entire workshop. It's called What Your Kids Tell You. That's to create, especially for child safety. It's extraordinarily important.
Right.
Because one of the things the abusers count on is that the children will feel uncomfortable and they won't want to disclose. And there's a great amount of research of what encourages children to disclose to parents, and it's everything you would think is logical. Close environment, families who spend time together, a lot of those. Anyway, so I asked Rabbi Kamenetsky how he would respond. I promise he absolutely blew me away. He said the father should tell his son that we say in Friday night's prayers in the davening, Yimei Shneseinu Behem Shivim Shana. David HaMelech, King David, says that our time in this world is 70, 80 years in the context of a broader discussion. But so Rabbi Kamenetsky said, what's the message to us? That we're here in this, we arrive in this world, we cannot see God. We cannot see God. God left us, a Torah. My Rebbe used to say that when you pray, you're talking to God. When you read the Torah, he's talking to you. So you have a vibrant dialogue, but you still don't see him. So he says we have 70, 80 years to figure it out. That's what he said. To become more spiritual, to become less selfish, and become more kind. I promise, he said those words. I wrote it down. He said, tell the father that he should tell his son, you're 17, you have 53 years to go.
Wow, beautiful.
And ask me anything you. Amazing, Rina. I see.
Amazing.
I'm telling you, all the years I've been asking him questions, first I write down what I would answer, and then I call him and I see, like, if they're similar, I stop asking him questions about that subject. But he blew me off. It was amazing, and it was just so simple and so obvious and so brilliant. It was just such a great way. I actually wrote an article in Mishpacha magazine called "Not Yet," that he did. Instead of criticizing him, he said, "Not yet. Okay, we'll get there. Let's talk about it." So like I think that's just such an important message for parents to including to leave everything open for discussion to the children, including things that are going to make us uncomfortable. That we won't be happy hearing. And the good practice is to tell your children, look, I might be upset by what you're saying, but I love you. I want you to be able to talk to us about anything. So, go for it.
I think that story also indicates that, like, even us as adults, we still have a few more years that we can still be figuring things out. Like, can we give permission to, the fact that as adults, we might not have all the answers. We may be struggling in our own Yiddishkeit as well. Is that okay to model that to our kids sometimes? Or is that, like, I don't know. Does it make them feel unstable?
No, I think, in other words, Um, I think we should be. I think we should understand. Our children should be comfortable hearing from us that not everything comes easy, and some things are challenges that we don't understand. I've been very honest with my students. My father's 59th yard site was last week. Okay, you know, I was a little kid. I was 3 years old. I say to you know, I haven't figured this one out yet. You know, and I would be lying if I said I did.
Right.
So
I really love that.
I'm sorry.
No, I just love that vulnerability that I think is so important. Yeah.
I haven't figured it out. I don't think I'll get any smarter in the whatever Hashem should grant me many more years. You know, I don't think I'll ever figure this one out. And look, we lost 3 mothers in our yeshiva. We lost 3 mothers, God forbid, to cancer over a 12-year period. And I'm a big believer. I went into the classrooms. I mean, you know, this is when it comes up, when the rubber meets the road and we're faced with challenges. So, of course, I brought in professional bereavement counselors for the kids, but I went into every classroom and I told them, it's okay if you're upset with Hashem about this, because we paid for them. And an honest relationship means that you can talk, and I want you to have an honest relationship with me. And I really allowed the children to talk. In fact, I had a staff. Each of the 3 times I called the staff meeting, I told my Rabbi and my teachers that if you see children that don't want to daven, that aren't praying now, don't say a word to them. At least I said at least for a month. And there's some kids actually would come in and leave their siddur, their prayer book, closed. That was their statement that they would like. And you know, one of the things I would ask the kids, and the kids would say, you know, Rebbe, this is the best I ever prayed in my life, you know, for their friend's mother. And, you know, so should I say you have to have perfect faith?
Right.
Faith, by definition, I believe means that there are parts of things that you don't understand. That's what faith, you don't need faith if you don't. Faith means, by its very definition, you know, being able to maintain a relationship with the questioner. That's how I feel.
That's beautiful. Okay, so I want to segue into our next topic, which is, you know, specifically current challenges facing teenagers today. And, you know, when we say today, I mean, I was just reading in the New York Times had a piece how, you know, mental health, depression, anxiety has just skyrocketed amongst teens since COVID. And it sounds so cliche to say the world is changing so fast, but seriously, the last 2 years have really brought upon, you know, significant changes for teenagers and their lives in general. So, you know, when we talk about challenges for teens, when we could talk about right now how COVID has impacted their everyday life and how that impacts their, you know, religious identity, or we could talk about in general in terms of the challenges of the secular world poses to their, you know, to their own faith and their own observance. So I'm going to pinpoint and ask Rabbi Horowitz, we could start with you. What do you see as the top challenge? If you could just whittle it down to one facing religious teens today.
Figuring it all out, you know, sorting it through. There's a fire hydrant of information coming at the kids.
Right.
And, you know, and that's just gonna, I don't see that getting any, the volume is just gonna increase, you know.
Like too many options, too much information, not knowing how to sift through it.
I think, honestly, I think just figuring it out. Just figuring it out. You know, I would tell my staff, my business school, my teachers, that everything that they're teaching their children, in other words, faith-based things that the Rebbeim are talking to the kids about, I said, is going to be subject to a coach's challenge. You know, they're gonna get a message over the phone sometime in the next 5, 10, 20 years that's gonna challenge what you said and offer a different perspective, you know. So I think that's why it's so important to be approachable, that children can discuss questions with us. So it's not just that, it's the social pressure, it's the cyberbullying, you know. I'm 62 years old, so, you know, I got a couple of years on the two of you. But, like, you know, adolescence was always challenging, but in my day, if someone was embarrassing you or putting you down, 10 people heard about it.
Right.
5 people, 20, 50 maybe. You know, the pressure of someone having, you know, the whole school, the whole world, everybody, you know. I was involved with 3 different situations in the past 2 years. They happen to have been, unfortunately, teenage girls that, you know, help coaching the parents. Not that I don't speak to the girls directly, but I coach parents. But the kids didn't want to go to school. One of them, someone took a picture when they were little, you know, at a party or whatever it is, you know, and went around the WhatsApp chat. And I mean, the fear of, I think it's just figuring it all out, trying to figure it out. I believe, I absolutely, with every fiber in my body, I believe that every single generation since the beginning of time thought that the next generation is going off the rails.
Yeah.
That this is the last generation of spiritual people, of decent people now. I absolutely believe it. And I don't think it's true. I think, you know, they figure it out eventually. Some generations have had more challenges than others. But we'll get through this too. But, you know, we just have to parent differently. We have to be more, the kids need more tech support from us. That's what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like that.
You said we have to parent differently. I'm posing the question too, is like, what's the main challenge you see facing teenagers? I mean, let's reverse that. We have to know as parents what those main challenges are, because we have to pivot. We have to be able to be fully aware of what our kids are going through and adapt our parenting and learn and educate ourselves how to handle it.
And I think the most important thing that parents can have is to have a happy home, like what you mentioned earlier, to have a place that the kids look forward to being in, to parents to be flexible, but primarily to have that type of relationship that kids can talk to you about, because their exposure to stuff comes earlier and more intense. It's more intense. So, in other words, if you don't know what's going, if the kids can't approach you, how in the world are you supposed to parent them?
Right.
You're really not parenting them. They need you most. You know, I saw the great bumper sticker, right? How's it? I need your love most when I'm most difficult to love.
Oh yeah.
So they need us to figure things out that they don't want to talk to us about. Yeah. So I think it's almost a prerequisite today that parents get that the house rules like that the culture of the home is like that children can talk to us about anything. I so strongly feel that that's something that we should get comfortable with. And like you said, people are worried, well, if they talk to me, what am I going to say? So you'll figure it out. You'll say you don't know. You'll say, you know, what better? You know, I ask parents sometimes, is marijuana worse than a cigarette? You know, is vaping worse than this? You know, the kids are drinking is nothing I can. Like you want to. So parents don't have the answers to a lot of those questions. They say, great, what am I going to do with my kids? So I said, great, so tell them, let's go together to someone who specializes in the field and let's talk it over. Yeah. I went with one of my boys to Dr. Twersky. He's some of the kids were drinking. I had access, but I went to Dr. Abraham Twersky with him. I said, what's an addiction? I said, I don't know, let's talk to Dr. Twersky. It so happens that I would have had an answer to it. But it was a great opportunity. He said, really? I said, yeah, come. We got in the car. I asked him for an appointment, and we sat down. I said, what is an addiction? I can stop? Everybody can stop. What's an addiction? So Dr. Twersky was going through it. We had him. But you can go to your pediatrician and get the same thing, or somebody who's in the space. And then look what a wonderful learning opportunity it is for the children.
Yeah, now you have to be educated. I happen to be very lucky. My husband's an internist. I have 2 teenagers, and we've had that conversation around the Shabbos table. Yep. Vaping, marijuana versus smoking. You know, getting the facts. Like, it's just really, really important to know. These kids have their opinions about all that. You know, they'll share all of their thoughts on what they think is okay and what's not okay and all that. All right, so I'm going to hear from you, Rina, what you think the biggest challenge that you're seeing facing Orthodoxians today, and then I'd love to open up the floor to questions from you, so from the audience. So we have a little question box at the bottom. Feel free to put a question down there, and hopefully we'll get to hear from you as well. Okay, so Rina, go for it.
So I would say that it's very similar to what Rabbi Horowitz was saying, this inundation of all these different ideas, and how do you figure them out, and how do you know what to believe? And especially nowadays, we live in a time when there are 3,000 different truths, and then how do I know that our truth is the right truth? And it's hard, and it's confusing. It's very difficult. And again, like what Rabbi Horowitz was saying, I think so often we shy away from these questions because we don't necessarily have the answers ourselves. And so we don't necessarily want to, have that like kink in our armor. We don't want our kids to be able to see like, oh, I don't have it all figured out. And, and there are other conversations that we're embarrassed to have with them, or we're afraid to have with them. Or if I talk about it, then they'll do it. If I talk about it, then they'll know about it. Well, here's the deal though. If you don't talk about it, they will still know about it, only you won't know what they know, and you won't be able to guide them in how it's going to go. So I think that we sort of have to, get past this embarrassment or the shame. I don't know exactly which one it is, of A, not knowing the answers like Rabbi Horowitz was saying, and B, knowing that especially if the kids are coming to us, so they want to know, what do you think about it? What's your opinion on it? And they're trying to feel us out for like, and where would you stand if I stand over here? Like, how does that all work? They want to know what the relationship will be like, all those sorts of things. It's such a golden opportunity. And it's also so important. So often we sort of try to, again, like clamp down on things, right? So like no internet and no phone and no social media. Well, how about these are some of the problems that can arise when it comes to the internet and phones and social media. These are some of the problems that can come up, or these are things that I've seen happen or have heard about. And what do you think? And how can we just, right? And when you can enter into conversations about any of these topics with your kids, you're in a much, much, much better place to be able to help them figure it out. And that really is the biggest thing. There's so much to figure out. And there's also, again, I've seen this a lot in school. There's so much pressure for them to have everything figured out already, right? We see 17-year-olds who are like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm like, you know how many times I've changed, like pivoted in what I've been doing, and it doesn't make me flaky, and it doesn't mean that I do, like, life is fluid. It keeps going. People change. It's okay if you don't have your entire life plotted out at 17. And I tell the kids, and then I also often tell parents who come to me and they're, they're beside themselves. My kid isn't religiously where I want them to be. My kid, they don't know where they're going for university. They don't know this. Your kid is a kid. They're not a finished product. Neither are you, right? So we're always growing and evolving and all these sorts of things. Let's give them a little bit of space and breathing room and say like, okay, you don't have that figured out. That's normal. That's okay. And enter into the conversations that will help them to be able to figure out, okay, so I just heard this idea. It sounded amazing or it sounded completely crazy. I don't know what to do with it. What do I do with it? Okay, let's talk about it. Well, what do you think about it? Oh, well, I've heard this about it. Or let's go talk to the doctor or to the whoever and figure these things out. Oh, there was a book about this. So do it together and help them. That's what we're supposed to be doing, right? And it's hard. It's not easy. It's not easy, but so often I think that one of the funnest parts of parenting is how often we need to swallow our pride and just be able to, like, for the benefit of my kid, I'm just going to say, I don't know. For the benefit of my kid, I'm going to have this really difficult conversation that makes me so super uncomfortable, but my kid needs this now. And it's so hard. I'm not trying to minimize that idea, but every now and then, and if we need support to do that, by the way, so important. If we need support to do that, that's okay too. To say to your kid, like, that's a great question. I would love to discuss it with you tomorrow. And then you go and you call whoever you need to, and you're like, oh my God, they asked this question. What am I supposed to do about it? And you can have your freak out session too. That's fine, right? So find your support system too, so that you can be able to be their support system.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So important that we have to feel supported ourselves. And also, if we don't have the answers, to say, you're asking a theological question about Judaism, you want to know some information that I don't have. I'm going to talk to our rabbi. I'm going to get this book out. We're going to learn it together. You know, really important message. Okay, any questions from our audience? Last chance, either for Rina or Rabbi Horowitz or for both. Okay, so I don't see any questions. Can I just get one more nugget from each of you? I know it's 9:45, but we still have people joining, so I'm going to just keep you on for another couple minutes. You've talked a lot about, both of you, and I so appreciate your messages for parents. I think there are probably a lot of parents here. Can you share what's your message to parents who are trying to raise their kids with Jewish values? You know, just because we have those values, we can't assume that our children are going to have them. So how can we, what's a message on how we can effectively impart those values to our children in not a suffocating way or not a pressurizing way? Who'd like to take it first?
I'll start.
Oh, now we've got our questions coming in, but go ahead, Rina.
I think that this is, I would say that this is sort of like when you're on the airplane and they say put your mask on first before you put your kid's mask on. I think that so often we don't invest in ourselves and in our own knowledge and our own religious inspiration, all those sorts of things. So it makes it that much more difficult to be able to impart it. And part of really what's going to do the most for them is not when we tell them what to do and not when we lecture them and not even when we're like, look what I'm doing, you should do it too. But when we just live the way that we believe is right, when we live our values, the kids will see that. And it's entirely possible though, and I think that this is a really important message. It is entirely possible that you can have the most wonderful, loving, incredible parents who are so inspired on their own and they're living their values and the kid still doesn't take it. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make the parents bad parents, and it doesn't make the kid a bad kid. And I think, again, there's so much stigma around this. And I know it's hard. I have experience in this. It is very hard, but at the end of the day, our children aren't really this lump of clay that God gives us to mold into exactly what I want them to be. They are their own neshama, their own soul with their own path, their own journey. And it's like we can give them a map and we can circle on the map like, oh, I stopped here for gas, and this was a great place where I found a wonderful hotel, and this was the best place I found for food, and like, you could use this map, it would be great. And they could say, thanks, Mom and Dad, I'm not going there. And we need to be able to say, okay, so whatever your journey is, let me help you with that. Mm-hmm. And, if for anybody who is out there and your kid is perhaps on a path that wasn't the one that you envisioned, you're not alone, and you are not bad, and your kid is not bad. And it's hard to get there. I understand that, but if we can hold on to that and we can understand that God knew that you are the exact right parent for this child and that they were exact right child for you, it can change your entire perspective on how you approach all of this.
Wow, Rina, so beautiful. Beautiful, thank you. Rabbi Horowitz, message for parents.
One of the very profound game-changing things I learned when I first started dealing with teens at risk, 25 years ago. A woman in Israel, she lived in Har Nof in Jerusalem, and she was going for a doctoral thesis. So she came up with this idea that she was going to study the effect that the culture of Shabbos and what the home life was like around Shabbos, how it would impact the children's level of religious observance. And she called me before she started the study. She called me to pick my brains about what she should put in or not. So I asked her if she'd be kind enough to send me the results. Of course, everything redacted. And she did, and it was just really remarkable. It was an extraordinary level of correlation. That not only what they asked them questions. What types of schools would you like to send your kids to? Not necessarily religious. I don't know where I'll be. What type? And she asked them to describe Thursday night, Friday afternoon, Friday night, Shabbos afternoon, what first came to, and some of the things were so beautiful. I come home and I just smell, the food up, and everybody's relaxing and we're enjoying each other. And there's some of them was filled with such tension and stress, and and there was almost a direct correlation. The kids who had positive experiences at home were many times more likely to say that they would like to. They didn't use those words, of course. The questions were very wisely crafted, not to take them all the way, right? Not to lead them. But I said, what type of schools would you like to, and what type of school did you go to? They would, and the kids who had positive experiences at home were much, much more likely to want to raise their children the way they were raised. So, I think there's a really powerful message there that it's about spending your family time together. And a lot of times people get caught up with some of the really nice parts of Shabbos meals, like saying Torah thoughts and singing Zmira, singing Shabbos songs. But when it gets heavy and it gets stressed out, you're losing an awful lot there. And when people tell me the Shabbos tables are stressful, I ask them, what are your Hanukkah meals like? Everybody's having a great time. Hanukkah, everybody's together, we're just having a great time, because there's no level of expectation. You're not
But the expectation is that you're meant to be having fun, though. Sometimes you sabotage that. No?
No, I mean, you don't expect the children to sit there the whole time.
The kids are playing with their presents in the living room. Got it.
We have company. Yeah, I can't leave. True story. My mother called me. She was complaining that my son leaves the Shabbos table. True story. Every Friday night, he goes up to the bathroom for 45 minutes. And it drives us crazy. And so I asked her, how long are your meals? 2 hours, 2.5 hours. You have a lot of company. Yeah. I said, what happens if your child says, I want to be excused to the couch to read a book? What do you say? She says, in the middle of Shabbos meal to leave the table? So I said, you figured out the only place that he'll have peace and quiet to read a book. I said, he's been in school for 60 hours this week. What do you want from the kid? So I'm saying, when we set these, that's what I meant about the Hanukkah. It's the same family time, but we don't have those expectations of that everybody's going to sit like robots at the table. And some people can do it, and great, but most can't. So I'm saying, you want the best chance of being able to transmit our tradition and our values to the next generation. It a lot of it has to do with the culture that we set at home. The kids, where family matters, and where you just laugh a lot and enjoy each other's time, and that's all.
Beautiful. I'm going to tie that into, Rina, what you were saying before in terms of feeding ourselves and filling ourselves. And I would even use this very controversial word, self-care. If our Friday afternoons are very stressed, right, and we can really be honest with ourselves and come back to ourselves and say, how am I contributing as a mother or as a father to that environment? I think we have to be really honest with ourselves and make sure that we're feeding ourselves properly so that we can create that environment conducive to our children's growth and happiness in their own Judaism. It's hard. I mean, we all get stressed and it's all normal, but we have to know, when we need to work on it.
Right. I think I always feel like so many of the major relationships that we have in our lives are paradigm relationships for the way we relate to Hashem, the way we relate to God. So very often I see that kids who really, really, really are struggling very, very much with their parents, it sort of mirrors when they're also struggling with God. Because especially within Judaism, we think of God, we say, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Well, if my father is hard and he's judgmental and he's so strict and it's all like this. So, and I have problems with that. It makes it that much more difficult for me to turn to God and think that he's going to be kind and loving and open with me. So I think, and parents also, so meaning mothers as well. So I think the idea, like what Rabbi Horowitz was talking about, having it that our family spaces are places where our kids feel unconditional love, which doesn't mean that there aren't any expectations, although I definitely agree that like around the Shabbos table, like let's chill out a little bit and let everybody breathe and like and enjoy it. Like they're supposed to be owning, there's supposed to be enjoyment. And the kids don't enjoy it when they have to sit there with their hands on their laps and like, did you use the right like, I'm not saying anybody's necessarily that uptight, but I'm just saying to have that, if a kid feels unconditionally loved and accepted and that there is that place and space for them in the home, I think it translates to understanding or to a feeling that God loves them, God accepts them, that there is a place and a space for them at God's table too. And it makes it so much easier then for them to interact with their Judaism and to want to carry it through the rest of their lives, just like Rabbi Horowitz was saying.
Such a special point, and so glad you mentioned at the end of this live, it ends off on that beautiful insight. Really want to thank you both so much, Rabbi Horowitz and Rina, for sharing your insights, your expertise. Really, I've grown so much as a parent and as an educator myself from this conversation. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We've had a great crowd. I hope you've enjoyed it. We are putting together a Faces of Orthodoxy YouTube channel, which is housing all of our lives. So you can check it out. I think there's 2 on there now. This one will be on there too. And thank you so much. Have a great night. Again, thank you both of you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Real pleasure. Be well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Good Shabbos. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.